Over there?
Yeah.
It's just a holiday.
Oh, it's a holiday.
Public holiday, which I guess. As you can probably see, I'm a child of the Depression, and I saw poverty at its rawest form. And there's something about the present situation that reminds me of the Great Depression, with 1 million more young people out of jobs between the ages of 15 and 25. This is a national tragedy. The only difference today, I think, between now and then is that we have a social security system which was born from the people who survived the Great Depression and who were, at that time, determined that it would never happen again. In 1938 and early 39, there were no jobs in Canada, none. Then, in 1939, the war came along, and all of a sudden, Canada, which had been just sort of sitting on its back for the first little while, sprung into action and started creating very, very large sums of basically zero-cost money for the Government of Canada. The Government of Canada spent this money into circulation, and pretty soon everyone was working or in the armed forces. Unemployment came down to an historic low of 1%. And the Bank of Canada used that system to get us out of the Depression, to finance World War II, and then after that, as has already been said, to help finance some of our great post-war infrastructure, like the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Trans-Canada Highway and the great new airport terminals, and indirectly, because there was enough money around to pass to the provinces, the things like the Gardiner Expressway and the Toronto Subway, the first one, and so on. And there was money to do these things. There was money to pay for the infrastructure, and there was money for people to get ahead and to grow their businesses, and everything was working smoothly until 1974. In 1974, the Bank of Canada, unilaterally, as far as we can tell, with no advice or consent from either the Government of Canada or the Parliament of Canada, decided to change the rules. And they became a member of the Planning Committee of the Bank for International Settlements in Switzerland, and two things they did. They adopted the ideas of Milton Friedman and his colleagues at the University of Chicago. I give Milton credit for probably having caused more pain to more people than any other man who was ever born. And then the second decision was they decided to stop making low-cost money available to governments. And it's been downhill ever since. 1974, there were no food banks in Canada, not one. Today I think there are about 2,000, and the need's still growing. And other things, like there was no need for advertising on the side of buses or streetcars. And there was no need to start casinos in order to tax the poor indirectly.
Down with the casinos.
And there was none of this sort of nonsense that we've been going through for the last 2 or 3 decades, and it's getting worse now. And they took their orders from the Bank of International Settlements, which had a whiff of fascism in its background, and which helped finance both sides in World War II, and which is really run by the international banking cartel. And they, in fact, today are really running the world, including, I'm afraid, our country. And it has got to end. Now, in my book, Light at the End of the Tunnel, I mentioned something about who's running the world. And in 1942, even before the war was over, one of the three sisters, the Council on Foreign Relations, decided plotting a new world government to replace the Third Reich, in effect, that would take in us all, including Canada. And so they started taking steps in that direction. The three sisters, incidentally, are the Bilderbergers, the Council on Foreign Relations, and the Trilateral Commission, with the Bilderbergers being the apex of the whole thing. And that's where the international bankers congregate in secret and make decisions that affect our life. Well, they have gone on, well, they didn't go on the record, but David Rockefeller said that surely it was better for the elite of the world and bankers to run the world than for the kind of nation states that we've had in recent times. So that's what they've been doing for the last 40 years, and you can see the results everywhere. And globalization was part of it. The free trade agreement with the United States was part of it, because they control not only the banking system, they control the oil cartel, they control nearly all of the multinational companies, the big ones, through their shares and loans, and they control a large part of the American military that is involved in replicating the internet and the extraterrestrial technology in those underground caverns in Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. And I call them cabal in my book because they are the ones who are calling the shots. And they're calling them right across the world. And so when you see something in our budget that we call not bail out but bail in, you can be very, very sure that that's where it originated. Because they're setting up the system to rob us one more way. And imagine, in a democracy, to have people told, if you have a lot of money in the bank and the banks get into trouble, the banks can confiscate your money and turn it into shares. That is not democracy. That is the kind of plutocracy that they have planned for the whole Western world. And heaven help us as they go forward in this area. Now, we have put forward a manifesto, and if any of you haven't read it, I would advise you to take a close look at it to turn the situation around before it's too late. And we're suggesting that the government of Canada issue some shares in Canada and give them to the Bank of Canada and create $150 billion a year for 7 years approximately, and divide the $150 billion 50-50 with the provinces. Ontario's share would be $29 billion a year, and that would be enough to do the whole program that the Metrolinx has planned for us, and still bring down the Gardner and replace it, and start building the Portland seriously, and do all of the things back in the days when the Bank of Canada was helping the Canadian people and working for its shareholders instead of working for the international banking cartel. Now that's what we're promoting, and we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that the government buys what we call the new social contract between the government of Canada and the people of Canada, because that's what we want them to do. Now, one final thing that I would like to say to you about the urgency. On the way down this morning, I was reading the Globe and Mail, and you will recall that one of the documents that I circulated was to a leak from the Canadian press about the pact that we're negotiating with the European Union, in which allegedly we are to give up some of our rights over setting rules for our Bank of Canada and our banking system in order to coordinate them with the European rules. I'm telling you, if that's true, what they're suggesting is that we will no longer have the right to do what we are proposing to the government, that we will no longer have the right to have our Bank of Canada create debt-free money and give it to our governments to spend into circulation and save this country. And the same applies to the rest of the Western world. And they're getting very close. They've just left their negotiators over there for a few extra days to try and finalize the thing before the middle of June, so that it'll be a model for the United States when they start their negotiations. And I don't know if it's true or not, but knowing the cabal, I would say it is almost certainly true. So we've got about 2 weeks to try and get through to the press that we should know what's in that negotiation, and if it compromises our banking system, the rules, or anything in our control over the Bank of Canada in any way that we consider a treason, and we're going to hold them responsible if they do it. And furthermore, we would prefer that they didn't do it, because what we want to do is to get our country up and running and provide prosperity instead of austerity, because we know it's possible. And that's what we want them to do, because we can set the standard for the rest of the world. Our government owns the Bank of Canada on our behalf. They have majorities in both houses. They could pass the legislation to do what we're asking them to in 2 weeks or less, probably a week if they really wanted to do it, because they get no opposition from the other parties. And we should put the pressure on, turn up the screws, and say it's now or never. Government, come to our rescue, come to our aid, start working for the people, and stop down law favoring the 1% of the bankers over the people of Canada who you're supposed to represent. Thank you very much.